Okay, well, thank you very much. Thanks, Vilma, for getting this set up. And I see Deborah Collier on the line and other people I know. So it's really kind of fun to be here. When Sharon asked whether we would volunteer to do this, we thought, well, this will be good for us and hopefully will be interesting to others to really look back and see, so how have we grown our research program over these years? And I thought it was really important to have both the scientific perspective, so my perspective on this, but in particular to have Julie's perspective on what did the organization need to do to make sure that we could get there and then sustain those programs. So that's kind of what we've prepared for you. We're in no means saying this is the right way to do it, it's the only way to do it, or anything like that. We're simply saying that this is what's been our experience, what we've learned along the way, and how we've in essence gotten where we are. So I'm going to talk about kind of the specific, the elements of the programs that the research programs that we put up, and then Julie's going to follow with more of an organizational perspective on that. And yes, put questions in the chats. We have just over 30 slides, but if we don't get to all the questions and stuff at the end, we'll be happy to follow up with you. Okay, so the next slide I think is just me introducing myself as the Chief Science Officer at PanCAN. And the next slide then is to stress that we are a very mission-driven organization, and our mission, of course, is to improve the lives of everyone impacted by pancreatic cancer. We are young adults. I think we turn 23 this month, I think, if I'm right. So that's kind of exciting. And we started with one employee. Julie was the first employee, and she's seen the organization grow to, we have more than 160 employees now at this particular point in time. And so, and the way that we've got there, the next slide, is not only by being mission driven, but also being very metric driven. And the kind of overall metric we use for improving patient outcomes as our mission is the 5-year relative survival rate from pancreatic cancer. And this is a number we track and that we kind of look for on a yearly basis. As you can see, we've made some progress along the way. Our goal is to get to 20% 5-year relative survival by 2030. And the next click, Julie, shows that we've at least started to make some progress with this year's numbers. So it's something we watch very carefully and hold ourselves, in essence, really use that as a way to really measure our progress. Next slide. So the way that that we think to impact those numbers, we like to think of it as a comprehensive approach, that research and clinical initiatives are certainly a big part of improving 5-year relative survival rates. And that's what we'll focus on today. But in addition, clearly government advocacy has made a big impact on that, and I'll tell you a little bit more about that. We also have really as one of our foundations within the organization, patient and healthcare professional services. So a call center where we have over 20 full-time employees now that are answering patients' questions and getting them resources that will help them any place along their journey. And then, of course, underpinning all that is a very active community. A lot of people who are touched by this disease are very passionate about helping, about raising awareness, and they help us raise the funds that are needed to support programs like this. Next slide. So if we look at the strategy to the kind of the research strategy to improve patient outcomes, it was clear to us that, that it was a continuum of activities, and it needed to kind of start at the beginning with basic research and discovery, that it needed to encompass early detection research, it needed to encompass better treatments for the disease, and then, of course, patient support and disease management. And that we really needed to think about across that whole continuum. Next click, please. And so one of the, again, the very first initiatives within the organization was patient services. So a way to really help individuals get reliable information and get the kind of help and services and resources that can help them. And along that, with that came the understanding that to get them on clinical trials was the way that we could support clinical research. So that was really one of kind of the initial programs that were set up. Next, please. And then after that came the grants program. And the nice thing about the grants program is this ability to really impact the whole continuum of what's required for that, that you can fund grants in any of these areas. Next. And then after that came government affairs. And that was a couple years later, where building a government affairs group that would work on increasing federal resources became a priority. And the next slide will really show you why that is. So we did an analysis of public and private funding for pancreatic cancer a couple of years ago. And it's clear that about 85% of the resources, the research in the pancreatic cancer field comes from the federal government. The majority of that from the National Cancer Institute, some from other NIH institutes, and we were part of the Department of Defense peer-reviewed cancer research program, which gave us a little bit more. So, but still so that's why, you know, advocacy for government research seemed very important in this space. Next. So this is the NCI funding for pancreatic cancer research over time, since in essence the organization started. Clearly we saw an increase when there was a doubling of the NIH budget, but we continued to see an increase even when the NIH budget and NCI budget was quite flat. And that's really, I think, in part because going to Capitol Hill every year, advocating for federal resources that included pancreatic cancer research. We then had an effort to, and eventually a successful effort in passing what was called the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act. That was an act that required the NCI have a strategic plan for those 8 cancers that had a 5-year relative survival rate of less than 50%. And pancreatic cancer did benefit from that act with increased funding, which we could really track by looking at overall NCI funding. Next. And then our next effort was then to advocate for our very own Department of Defense Pancreatic Cancer Research Program. And we were successful in doing that. That program started in essence last year with about, was it $5-6 million, $7 million in it. And we're in our second year now with $15 million in it. And so that was, again, a very, I think it's a very good foundation, taking our cues from the breast cancer programs and starting up these kinds of programs. But we were successful in doing that. So that has really helped pancreatic cancer research. Next. But then, of course, there's still that 15% that comes from advocacy organizations and from nonprofit organizations like ours, and we're a part of that. And we feel that that is, again, very important that we invest in pancreatic cancer research ourselves. And as you can see, we've had a very nice, we started investing back in 2003 in research efforts and grants, and we've seen that our research investment has grown really nicely over the years, so that this year we intend to spend about $28 million on research. Next. And that research investment is spread over a number of different initiatives. There's the grants program, that's the longest standing research initiative, and I'll tell you more about that. But we've really expanded in recent years to take on some of these larger research initiatives that we really have a much more active and directive role in these particular research efforts. Next. So if we start with the competitive grants program, the earliest grants were junior investigator awards. They were fellowships, which are for individuals before they get their first faculty position, and career development awards, which we define as in their when they're starting their own faculty position. And as you can see, those were our initial grants. We continued to do that, and then we experimented through the years with those junior investigator awards. And we started things like a Pathway to Leadership Award, which was to bridge that transition between fellowships and your first faculty positions. And then we had Catalyst grants, which were to expand the amount of funding and the time of funding. So it looked a little bit more like an R01 grant to give these investigators, in essence, more resources as they started. And so we have experimented with that through the years. What we find at this particular point in time is those career development awards really are a sweet spot, at least for us and in our field. Next slide. We do an evaluation of our grants program about every 3 years. We look at, among other things, how much research funding in pancreatic cancer did those investigators get after their career development award from us was awarded. So in essence, have they been able to continue to get resources that specifically for pancreatic cancer? So in our overall grants program, we get about $11 a return on investment for every dollar we invest. But with the career development awardees, they're up to more than $30 for every dollar that we invested in them for their career development award. So, and when we look at the people that are the leaders in the field today, there are individuals that we funded, as a lot of them are individuals we funded early in their career with a career development award, and they have stayed in the field and they have continued to be very productive and to lead the field. So for us, that's really where we feel that that we would like to continue, keep that pipeline going, and that for us, the career development awards really are the best mechanism for that. Next. There, of course, research programs. We also fund research projects themselves for more senior investigators or for teams. And we've done a lot of evolution of these particular programs. It started with small pilot grants, innovation grants for more senior investigators. We then experimented and said, okay, we really want to fund clinical trials. We want to really make a difference in the survival rate for pancreatic cancer. So we had $1 million and even $2 million grants for clinical trials. It turns out that's difficult in our field to kind of sustain them and for them to be really productive, that it's very much dependent on pharma and that things happen with drugs, and that we found that that was, although some of those grants were very nice and reasonably successful, that it wasn't really getting us where to real changes in the treatment for the disease. We funded some translational grants where we thought that valley of death for in the translational space for things like toxicology studies for new drugs that are being developed in academia, that type of thing. And those were reasonably successful. But where we've really decided that perhaps the best use of our grants program is to augment some of our other initiatives, some of the other ones that I'm going to tell you about now, that are where we think we have a chance of kind of filling gaps that are needed within these various programs, and that our grants program is actually a very good mechanism to fill those gaps. Next. Okay, so once we got to the point where the grants, we were growing as an organization and could reach out a little bit in terms of what kind of research can we do. And the position that a nonprofit advocacy group is in is one of seeing the whole field and really looking at where gaps are, where things are needed, what can we do to kind of convene everybody, get them all pulling the rope in the same direction to make progress. And so that's really how things like our Know Your Tumor program and our patient registry program started. But perhaps the resource that we first recognized as being a research resource was our Clinical Trial Finder program. Next. And so what we had been keeping a database of active clinical trials in the pancreatic cancer space so we can give reliable information to individuals who call our call center. And so here was years of information on kind of the trends that were happening in the clinical trial space for pancreatic cancer. So one of our first internal research efforts was to do a deeper dive in that. And we've done that for a couple times now over the past decade. To look at what are those trends in clinical trials, and things like increases in the number of immunotherapy targeted clinical trials are the type of things that you can clearly see those trends over time. The thing that I was particularly interested in the beginning, I'm a molecular biologist by training, so I was looking at this really, there was so much precision medicine being done in other cancer types where you can find signals within the tumor itself that tell you what treatments are perhaps most likely to work. When we initially started doing this kind of deep dive, there were a lot of agents that were targeted to a pathway, but very few of them were biomarker driven. Very few of them were, actually, they were assuming that all pancreatic cancer tumors are the same and that we'll treat them with these different pathway inhibitors without really knowing whether that pathway is active in that particular tumor or not. And that was really that led us then to ask the question, next slide, please. Is precision medicine going to work in pancreatic cancer? So we went to our advisors and they said, no, it's not going to work. You're not going to have enough tissue. It's all going to be KRAS driven. You're not going to find anything. And so we said, well, yeah, maybe, but I think we need data to know that rather than just accepting that it isn't going to work. And here we had this call center where people were calling, we talked to more pancreatic cancer patients probably than any place in the world. And so here was perhaps an opportunity to help those patients get molecular profiling of their tumor, as well as then learn from them and see whether that approach is really going to work in pancreatic cancer. So we set up the program that we call Know Your Tumor, where again, through our call center, we provide individuals with the opportunity to get molecular profiling of their tumor. This has been going on now for 7 years or so. We've had, over 2,700 patients that have enrolled in the program, and it's all across the nation. And we're now focusing on those in community settings in particular. And we've had more than 1,600 reports that have been completed. Next slide.
Lynn, there's a couple questions that have come in the chat on the grants program. So I just wanted to go back for a moment and maybe answer those before you keep going.
Yeah.
So the other category, I'm not sure. Deb asked, what examples are in the other category?
For the clinical trials, yeah, those
Yeah.
are things that are like ways of changing how the drug is delivered. So it's perhaps a standard drug, but it's attached to a nanoparticle and it gets there in, so it improves the way that it gets there. There are some things like tumor treating fields, so kind of currents that are being used. So it's those kinds of things that don't fit, that are kind of a miscellaneous category that fit into that. And I interpret that increase in the other category to be a lot of innovation that is coming into this field. The translational grants. So yeah, that was an effort that we did in collaboration with Celgene, now BMS. And we were really quite specific about it had to be a therapy, and it was a 2-year grants program that we could add a 3rd year onto it. I think that has been relatively successful. In this particular case, we did it that way, and they in essence they had to own the intellectual property. It was not dependent on a company that owned the intellectual property. So that was that particular grants program. I can tell you now we just initiated our latest grant, is called the Therapeutic Accelerator Award, which is a $5 million grant, which is going directly to biotech in order to help them get their drugs into pancreatic cancer. So in particular, those that are not considering the challenges of pancreatic cancer to be, they see that as a barrier, and we're thinking that this will help them get over that barrier and to develop their drug for this particular disease. And we can tell you more about that. Deb also asked, payment for the test been a problem? Is there support for patients anywhere? I assume you mean the Know Your Tumor molecular profiling tests. So that is in the way we run Know Your Tumor now, we pay for the molecular testing. So we pay Tempus is our partner in that, and we pay Tempus to provide that molecular profiling support. So that, of course, isn't a problem. We hear less and less problems with insurance coverage now, but there certainly still is coverage. And sometimes it's simply that the physician doesn't want to take the time to do the pre-authorization and all that kind of stuff, which is why some of them really love our Know Your Tumor program, because they don't have to do that. They don't have to worry about it. Okay. So Know Your Tumor, I think, was quite successful. We were able to publish once we got about 1,000 patients into the program, that there are 27% of pancreatic cancer patients in their tumor. There is an actionable alteration. They're with a drug. And we were able to get real world survival data out of that, do Kaplan-Meier curves, and show a year's difference for those that have an actionable alteration that get treated with a targeted therapy specifically for that alteration. And so that gave us the data that we needed to say it's worth molecular profiling of pancreatic cancer patients, that it can make a difference on survival. So the question is about the patients who receive the profiling are getting value. So we do, our case managers help them with that. They do get, and they'll help them with a clinical trial search. They'll help with, informing them that there is an off-label treatment, or there is a standard therapy. There's only one in pancreatic cancer that's specifically biomarker driven. But if that, we make sure that the patient knows about that so that they can go to their physician and make sure that that's being considered as one of their treatment options. Okay, the registry. I know Genetic Alliance has been our partner in our patient registry, and this has been going on for almost about the same time. Started in 2015, about a year after the Know Your Tumor program. And one of the main drivers for this was we realized not everybody was appropriate for the Know Your Tumor program, but everybody had experiences to share. So we set up the patient registry within the peer system in collaboration with Genetic Alliance. We analyze the data from that both internally by staff as well as by partnering with academic collaborators, providing that data to them. We've had 3 publications thus far on the results from the registry, and just keep on enrolling and learning from that experience. Okay, so we started with that, and I think it was really the success of the Know Your Tumor program that said, okay, we can take on these multi-year, these larger projects. What's needed in the field? And it seemed to us that we really needed things at 2 ends. There were the problem with pancreatic cancer so often is that more than half of the individuals present, the disease is already metastatic. And in essence, there's only about 15% of pancreatic cancer patients who are eligible for surgery. So we needed something for that advanced disease, metastatic disease. We needed new drugs, new treatments. We had very few changes in the standard of care over the last couple decades. And then we had to get more people eligible for surgery. We had to work on the early detection end of that too. So we set up 2 large, multi-year, many dollars initiative. Once we felt that we were ready to take that step and could take that kind of responsibility on. One is Precision Promise. So next slide. Yes, Precision Promise is a platform clinical trial for metastatic disease. It is randomized, and the goal of it is by the end of Precision Promise that there would be an FDA ready package to change the standard of care in pancreatic cancer. And then we decided that was our best way of, if we could get everybody in the field, instead of doing things very isolated, doing it in a platform, sharing controls, making this a very efficient process, that was the way to really improve survival, to get those 5-year relative survival rates to budge faster. So we've been working on this a number of years now. It is open will be open at 30 sites by the end of this year. We have 2 standard of care arms and 3 experimental arms that are running, and over 125 patients have gone through the program thus far. So we are the sponsor of this clinical trial. So this is a very large, more than $5 million a year project that PanCAN undertakes in order to get this kind of umbrella approach to changing the standard of care in advanced pancreatic cancer. And that's really, Julie will tell you, that has really required quite a bit of organizational change in order to support something of that scale. Next. Again, working at the other end of the spectrum, we started what's called the Early Detection Initiative. This is, again, a clinical trial. We are the sponsor. The goal here is to identify individuals who have new onset diabetes. So are over the age of 50, their blood sugar has just crossed a threshold for the first time. And so they are, in essence, identified as having elevated blood sugars. This carries a 3-year risk of pancreatic cancer. Both the cells that control glucose and the cells that cause pancreatic cancer reside in the same organ, so there's some crosstalk there. It is an early symptom that has really not been recognized before. So we've set up a randomized controlled trial of over 12,000 individuals that we will be collecting samples from, as well as taking them to imaging to see if we can find pancreatic cancer early using new onset diabetes as, in essence, the trigger for that workup. Next slide. And then the third is the third kind of big program that we started a little bit more recently is saying, well, geez, now we have all this data. We have data from Know Your Tumor program. We have data in the registry. Precision Promise is generating data. The Early Detection Initiative is generate data. Let's make sure that when appropriate, that data gets into the hands of the scientific community, those researchers that can perhaps find more things from it than was originally intended. And so we've set up Spark, which is a data access platform to integrate all that data and then make it available to researchers. And right now, the Know Your Tumor data is in there. We are working on getting some external pancreatic cancer data into it and the Precision Promise data into it, and we'll add other data sources as time comes. And have piloted this with academic researchers, but intend to, in essence, roll it out. There was a question about COVID affected the trials. Yes, COVID has affected the trials. Certainly accrual is much slower than what we had originally anticipated. People are not coming in, for instance, blood sugar levels. There are some of our clinical trial sites for Precision Promise were, in essence, not taking any new patients for a while. Nothing has stopped, but everything certainly slowed down and needed adjustments during COVID times. Next. Okay, so just briefly where we are today. Next is that we have continued to do internal research and publish. And so we can really, show results from our Know Your Tumor program, our clinical trial analysis, some of the supportive care and patient caregiver surveys we've done, some through the registry and some independent. And so that, we think by taking some of the research efforts that we've done and in essence, looking at it from our lens, that we've been able to contribute to the field in terms of where pancreatic cancer should and is going in terms of the research efforts. Next. Our grants program, as I kind of alluded to before, has evolved to really kind of support some of those initiatives, Precision Promise, the Early Detection Initiative, and Spark. And so what we find now is we still have our career development awards. We're still going to do those career development awards. We can do fellowships that are associated with some of those larger initiatives. And then we look for ancillary studies and things that will, in essence, tee up a project that can then slide into Precision Promise or slide into the Early Detection Initiative, or another way of analyzing some of the health data that we've generated. And so we find that a grants program can be very flexible. We have committees set up, so we have kind of a ready-made review group, and this all works. We think that this is a good way to use this this particular, the grants program then synergizes nicely with these larger initiatives. Next. And our investment then has increased. So this is really our research investment that we've seen through the years and how we've kind of added on to it as we go in order to be able to handle these larger initiatives. And I'll turn it over to Julie to say how we managed to make this work.
Great, thanks, Lynn. Thanks for that great overview. It's fun to reflect backwards and think of all that we've done and sort of the many stories that go along with it, that you can imagine all of those different programs. So I'm Julie Fleshman. I'm the president and CEO of PanCAN. I came to PanCAN because my father was diagnosed with pancreatic cancer back in 1999. He was 52 years old. He only lived for 4 months, unfortunately, a fairly typical pancreatic cancer story. And I was angry. I couldn't understand why nothing was being done about this disease, why there was no research, why we were given no, answers when my father was diagnosed. And about that same time, PanCAN was founded. I'm not one of the founders, but I ended up being hired as the very first employee in 2000. So hard to believe, almost 22 years ago. And so I have a unique perspective to look back. When I started at PanCAN, our budget was about $250,000. This year, we will raise nearly 50 million. And I was the first employee, and today we have nearly 170 employees. So I've certainly watched the organization grow and seen all the different, life cycles of a growing organization. I certainly could spend some time talking to you about, the things that are necessary on the fundraising side and the marketing side to support, this growth in our research programs. But that's, depending on where you are and the size of your organization, those tactics, can vary. And so what I thought might be more useful here is to just talk about some of the underlying philosophy of the organization that I believe have been critical to allowing us to grow our research program, ultimately grow the organization, but really grow our research program and our focused efforts there. So as I reflected back and thought, well, what are those elements, of success? Culture, people, planning, and a committed network. Those are the 4 things. If I had to say, what are the underlying elements that have made PanCAN successful and our ability to grow? So I'll just talk briefly about each of these, and then we'll have time to answer any questions. So culture. So when I really think about PanCAN, I think sort of the culture, the bottom line culture of the organization is, why can't we do that? That is the attitude. That is the way we look into anything that we're thinking about doing. Most of what we have tried and done over the years have been things that never have not been done, certainly not done in the pancreatic cancer space, but many times haven't even been done in other disease types, or not exactly in the same way that PanCAN was doing. And so very much that attitude of, well, why isn't that possible? Why can't we do it that way if that's really what's needed for patients? And I just give you a specific example. Lynn mentioned the Recalcitrant Cancer Research Act, which was, again, a bill that PanCAN, through our advocacy efforts, helped to get passed. And it took 5 years to get that bill passed. And I will tell you, in the early days when we first initially launched the bill with our champions in Congress, I don't really think that anyone thought that it was going to make it all the way across the finish line and sort of, oh, that's great, good job, PanCAN, you keep at that. But as it gained momentum and people started to realize that, wow, they actually have a lot of support for this and a lot of signatures, and this actually may pass, we had a lot of people in senior leadership positions from different organizations questioning, was this really the right approach? Should we be doing this? This has never been done before. Why are you doing this bill? And ultimately, none of that stopped us. We knew this was the right thing for our patient community. And although it was a different approach to getting a bill passed, it didn't have appropriations attached to it. We felt this was a different, innovative way to get a bill passed, hold the National Cancer Institute and other leaders accountable, and have our congressional champions behind us. So that's, just one example of a, why can't we do that? And then it was hard. Every step along the way, it was hard. We were pushing a boulder, up that hill until finally at the end, the boulder started to roll down on the other side. So in order to have that kind of culture, the people that you have in your organization are really important. And so again, there's lots of ways I get to describe our people, but I thought these words are helpful in thinking about the kind of people that you need to take on all of these types of initiatives that Lynn talked about. People that are always learning. People that are willing to take risks, willing to have something potentially fail because we believe it's the right way to go, and we'll learn from it, and then we'll pick up the pieces and we'll move on to something else. Certainly an entrepreneurial spirit of, again, there is no playbook for curing pancreatic cancer. And so we have to come up with those ideas and those innovations, and we have to build the roadmap. And then ultimately we have to be very flexible. Lynn can tell you as well that I don't think any of these big initiatives ended up being exactly the way that we thought they were going to be when we launched them, or certainly when we were planning them. And you have to be able to willing to pivot and to say, okay, didn't work the way we thought, let's pivot and let's do it this way. It doesn't mean it's not the right thing. It just means we have to do it slightly differently. I was in a meeting with another organization, and we were talking about Precision Promise because they wanted to launch an adaptive clinical trial or do something similar. And they asked me, what was the most important thing going in, to building Precision Promise? And as the CEO, there's a ton of operational things and logistical things and having the right expertise and all of that. But ultimately, I really, believe in order to do an initiative like that, you have to be in an organization that is willing to, it's going down a path, we have to pivot, everybody rallies, figures out the solution, and moves down the new path. That there's challenges that come up, quite frankly, every day that aren't necessarily anticipated and planned for. And we have to have people that can handle that are okay with that, and can quickly problem solve to find a solution so that things can continue to move forward. The third sort of critical piece, I think, is planning. That, as much as we need to be flexible and open to new ideas, that we do have a very rigorous annual planning process. We're extremely metrics driven, as Lynn mentioned, and transparent. Our priority metrics are reviewed with our staff monthly. They're up on our walls in our office if you come visit us. We want everyone to know what the goals are, what the metrics are for the year, where we are in relation to those metrics, and what we still need to do to accomplish them, by the end of any planning year. So I think that the planning aspect is really important, and that planning has definitely evolved and changed over the years, what that planning looks like as a small organization and what it looks like today as a much larger organization where there's a lot of cross-departmental activities going on. It has certainly changed, but the rigor of having an annual process and an annual budget, is, I think, extremely critical to success. But then, once you start down that plan's been approved, the budget's been approved, still being flexible to changes that need to be made along the way because of whatever it is, whether it's something like a pandemic or something more mundane. And then finally, you know, the last piece that I think has been so critical to PanCAN's success is a committed network. And in our case, our committed network, you know, includes certainly our advisors, our board of directors, our scientific and medical advisory board. We have a large volunteer affiliate network made up of 59 affiliates around the country, and those core volunteers that lead those affiliates, you know, are certainly part of this committed network. And then, you know, some of our critical donors that have been with us for many years. And that committed network is so important in an organization where you are going to change and make changes along the way. Because that committed network trusts, at the end of the day, change is not easy. Change management, even with a committed network, is absolutely necessary, and change is still hard. But those people that have been with you ultimately trust PanCAN and trust that we're making the right decisions for our patients and to have the greatest impact. And so that helps you get through those challenging times of change. And you know, one of the sentiments that we say a lot at PanCAN is our PanCAN family, that anyone who's a part of our organization is part of our PanCAN family. And I think people really do feel that when they are associated and working with PanCAN. So, you know, those were sort of my overall, you know, thoughts about the critical elements in order to have the growth and take on these really large, long-term, expensive research initiatives. You know, and the bottom line is we have to keep evolving. That what got us here is not going to get us there. And you got to have a team of people that are okay with that and want to continue to, you know, evolve and change. And I feel lucky that I've always had a board of directors that has that same philosophy and has been extremely, extremely supportive of PanCAN. And you know, a lot of these big initiatives that are quite, you know, we are definitely taking a risk as an organization to ensure that we can sustain them, we can fund them, and you know, that in the end of the day that they have the impact that we are hoping that they will have for patients. So I think that was sort of our overview, and you know, I don't know if there's been any other questions that have come up in the chat, Lynn. It looks like there might be one here for you.
There's one for you, Julie, about did we hire outside lobbyists? What advice would you give to small organizations doing that? That's when you were talking about the
bill.
Yes, the bill efforts. Yeah.
Yeah, no, that's a great question. So, you know, of all of the areas of the organization, our government affairs team is actually the smallest. We spend the least amount of resources in that area. And so I do believe it's actually an area where you can have great impact with few dollars. And yes, we have always had a policy consultant. So in the early days, we only had a policy consultant and no staff. Now we have a policy consultant plus a couple of members of staff, but in a team of almost 170 people, I only have 2 staff members that are in our government affairs team and someone who is our a policy advisor. So I do think working with a consultant, especially if you're not in DC and that is not your world, where the consultant, at least in the more recent years, has really helped us, is they have the relationships on the Hill. They know the staffers, they know the members of Congress, they know what committees they sit on, they know how to help guide our strategy of where we focus our grassroots efforts.
Feel free to unmute if your question hasn't been answered, if you have any additional questions or comments.
So this is Deb Collier. You guys are doing a great job, and I've known that all along. I've been following you through the years, so terrific job. I'm wondering, you know, a lot of us are pushing for innovations in clinical trial design and implementation and things like that. So, you know, COVID, the silver lining of COVID for a lot of patients, at least on the clinical trial side of things, is that we're making them a little more convenient for patients, having more local procedures, even sometimes home care or delivery, tests, follow-up, all of that type of thing, as well as, digital apps and things like that. So I was wondering what your thoughts are there. Have you seen a change in that in clinical trials for pancreatic cancer? And are there any efforts that you're having in pushing for some of those things as well?
Yep, it's a great question. Lynn, you want me to start or you want to go?
Yeah, why don't you start and then, yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I think the biggest change that I've seen over the last couple of years because of COVID is really the telehealth and the ability for patients to have, their appointments virtually, which certainly was not happening before. So I think I feel like is the biggest change that I've seen in our patient community. We certainly are advocates for, what could be done in a local setting without that patient having to travel to that major, institution to participate in a clinical trial. However, I can't say that Precision Promise is a registration trial. So it's a phase 2-3 trial where a drug can be approved by the FDA through Precision Promise. And with that comes a lot of regulations and in some cases, less of an ability to adopt some of those things. I mean, that's basically what we've learned through this. But in the places where we can, the things that are not part of the research study, but are the more routine treatment, blood tests, those kind of things, those are the types of things that can be done locally that don't have to be done, in the research institution. So I don't know, Lynn, if you want to add to that.
Yeah, that's what I was gonna say is that we've, I've been on CTAC and with the NCI, and I've sat on a lot of these discussions, and there's so much that can be done to really change the way clinical trials are done. But it really gets harder and harder when you get to a registration trial. There are, as Julie said, where we've just hit a lot of those limitations that maybe the FDA is going to be willing to, to budge on some of those, but their need for really rigorous data is a very real need. I mean, we want drugs where the research is valid, right? I mean, and so they have all those checks and balances for it, which is just going to be harder in some of the settings where I think we could make, major changes in clinical trials at other stages. But I'm not giving up on it, but I am realizing that difference.
Great. And I'm also wondering, what kind of reception have you gotten from the research community about Spark, and how, that's the ultimate goal, I understand, but how do you see that being implemented, or the beginning steps?
Yeah, the research community doesn't seem to be, they're anxious and interested in getting, for instance, like the Precision Promise data, because we do biopsies, there's tissues that are stored as well as those that are molecularly profiled. So there's both data and there's samples, there's blood stored, there's just all sorts of things that are, it's going to be a repository for that, for both that information and those samples. And Spark will help us, with that in particular, then turning that into data and insights. So that the pilots that we've done, people were very excited about it. Again, we're not ready to roll it out. The Precision Promise data is not publicly available yet, but the Know Your Tumor data is. And so people seemed to be interested.
Yeah, probably the group that maybe gets a little more nervous about it is pharma versus the academic researchers. And we, as you can imagine, have to have a lot of very clear contracts in place, especially around precision promise with the data that is for registration, a registration study that will go to the FDA, and the data that is not part of that. So those are all things that we've had to work our way through.
Well, great job again, and thank you for sharing this. I probably need to talk to you separately, so I will, about possible collaborations with other groups. But one question is, I'm still a part of I Spy 2, which is in breast cancer, one of the first platform studies, and they are continuing to evolve and learn from the science. And so, whatever, it might be a good group. I'm sure you have talked to them in the past, but it might be good to revisit that as you're developing yours. Implementing it.
Yeah. Yeah, Precision Promises, is done in collaboration with the Berry Group. So that, of course, did the I Spy 2 statistics and stuff as well. So we get a lot of learnings that way. But yes, you're absolutely right. There's a lot of things that we can learn from. Yeah, we can learn from their experience. Yeah.
Thank you so
So
much,
like
Lynn.
yeah, at the
No, I
end of
just
the
wanted
hour.
to say thank you. This was such an amazing presentation. You guys made it look so easy, what you've done in the past couple decades. But I know, I just admire your energy and your creativity and that drive to pursue your mission and be agile in the process to respond to change and pivot, as you mentioned, as needed, right? To succeed. So this is exactly the kind of information that, we want to share about what's been successful, what's been a challenge in the process. So I really appreciate you making the time to share your story.
Happy to do it. Thank you for having us.
Yes, thanks for the opportunity.
As I mentioned, this has been recorded and will be available on our website to watch again, to share with anyone who is interested in listening to this amazing presentation. Thank you all.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.